Alright, so we're going to try using Screencast-O-Matic here to go over the first part of your study guide. And the first thing on the study guide for the test tomorrow is the first thing that it says that you should know is why Washington went to New Jersey. So basically, why did he leave New York and then head to New Jersey? So while many of you might think that that Washington took his army to New Jersey because he was such a fan of the show Jersey Shore and he liked to fist pump like a champ. By the way, this is an artifact from the Valley Forge Memorial Museum, George Washington's trucker cap. Just kidding. Maybe that's not too funny. Anyway, Washington really went to New Jersey not because he liked Jersey Shore, but because of the troop movement and the buildup of British troops in New York and the fact that they did lose some battles in New York. And so basically he went to New Jersey in order to regroup. Now this page is from the PBS series Liberty, and it's got some kind of mock-up of newspapers, and it says it's from Christmas week of 1776. Dark hour for the rebels, latest in the series of misfortunes for the Continentals. What is Washington's next move? And over here it talks about George Washington and his army having to spend the holiday season on the road. And it says that there was harassments, battles with the British army. The 6,000 rebels were tired, footsore, and hungry. It says the latest in a string of misfortunes to beset Washington. American forces have been mostly on their heels. Now this is one kind of key point. I think it mentioned this in the book, but I'm not sure to what extent. It says that there was a huge British fleet in the New York harbor. And so there was a real big buildup of this fleet in New York harbor. That's where Washington and his troops had been. And after that, and then it says Washington and his troops were swept off Long Island, capped by American defeats at Fort Washington and Lee on the Hudson River. So the Continental Army basically went to New Jersey for those purposes. Now, in regards to the second question about whom Washington's troops fought, the second thing that it says that you should know, there may have been some redcoats involved at the time, but it did say that that there was a brigade of Hessians in Trenton. And the Hessians, and again this is kind of a useful site from PBS, it says that during the American Revolution, Germany was divided into over 300 principalities. Many of these tiny countries supplied soldiers for the British Army in its fight against America, but by far the largest group came from Hesse Castle, and I'm not sure if it's Hesse or Hesse, but as a consequence, during the war and ever since, the Germans fighting with the British were lumped together and called Hessians. Okay, it goes on to say the Hessian services were bought and paid for by King George III, who just didn't have enough soldiers in his own army. It says German soldiers had served many European nations in a similar fashion for years, but they were not true mercenaries. Most of the Hessians received no compensation for their services beyond their daily bread. It was the prince of that section of Germany who really made a lot of money off of this, selling his troops over to Britain. It says in total nearly 30,000 German soldiers fought for the British in North America. For many Hessians, the possibility in the rich new land with a growing German population was a great enticement to desertion. So some of these Hessians did stay behind. In fact, it says about 5,000 of them stayed behind in this country, while many of the other ones returned home after they lost the war fighting with the British. Alright, the next part on there is that it says that you should know the details of the battle at Trenton, New Jersey. And again, in this part, before we even get to the details of the battle at Trenton, there is that little part about Thomas Paine's The Crisis. And it does say here that while Washington was in New Jersey, they wanted to avoid a large battle. They were trying to basically regroup. But things were not going well. You know, why did the Patriots need motivation at this time? We'll get to that in just a second. But it does talk here about the fact that they used Thomas Paine, or that Washington used Thomas Paine's The Crisis to really kind of rile up the troops. So here it says the inspiration for the cause was recently provided by the brilliant pamphleteerist. How's that for a word? Thomas Paine. And here you can see, you know, a little bit from a picture of an actor portraying Thomas Paine. But it talks about the fact that Thomas Paine wrote this essay, Common Sense, that helped inspire independence. Well, then he wrote the one, The Crisis, and it says Washington subsequently ordered the troops to have this read to them. And he said that Paine's thing was originally written on a drumhead, or maybe they copied down the pamphlet's information onto the drumhead. But Paine's opening refrain has a stirring beat of its own, and it says, "These are the times that try men's souls." It says it is doubtful whether Paine's words alone will be enough to invigorate the American cause. The sense here is that Washington needs to take a gamble. He desperately needs a victory to hold his troops together and to keep the hopes of the revolution alive. So, again, jumping kind of ahead of number 3, for number 4 on your study guide, it says, what was Paine pushing in this pamphlet? Basically, he was trying to say, if you're just going to be, here for a good time in the summer, we don't need that kind of a soldier. Instead, so we don't need the summer soldier or the sunshine patriot, basically calling them fair weather fans. He says those guys shrink from the service of their country. What we really need are people that are going to stick it out into the end, and they deserve the praise and thanks of love and women. But the reason that they needed this motivation is just the really rough conditions where they were in New Jersey, and so they needed a big move.
I could be at home planting my crops right now. Why are we even fighting this war?
Heads up, gentlemen. These are the times that try men's souls.
Alright, so that maybe wasn't the best reenactment that you could possibly find. I don't think anybody would have said this war sucks carrying around a hockey stick or a guitar right there. But you get the idea that Washington tried to rally up his troops. And here's a famous picture of Washington crossing the Delaware River, because that's really what happened at Trenton, New Jersey, is that on Christmas night, actually, Washington crossed the Delaware River, talks about catching the Hessians unaware, and basically surprising them with an ambush. They weren't expecting to be attacked on Christmas Day, and Washington's troops were able to kill or capture a great number of Hessians and basically take that battle. From there, they quickly went on to Princeton, New Jersey, without really resting the troops, and secured another victory against the Hessians. So there you go. All right, so then we have the battle at Saratoga, and here again is that Liberty thing from PBS, and it says Burgoyne surrenders at Saratoga. French aid coming to the States? Question mark. The harsh realities of war in the American countryside. Leave the champagne at home, Johnny, and then oh fatal ambition. So on the study guide it says what caused the British to lose at Saratoga. And it does say here that on October 17, 1777, a British army of nearly 7,000 surrendered to a combined force of the American militia and Continental regulars. The fortunes of war have made me your prisoner, said British General John Burgoyne as he handed over his sword to his American counterpart Horatio Gates. I shall always be ready to testify that it was through no fault of your excellency, Gates replied. Anyway, news of the momentous British defeat spread quickly through the colonies and fueled speculation that the French government would now seriously consider entering the conflict on the American side. And so that's getting into the second part of this question. How did the war shift at the Patriot victory? That now people are starting to take American independence seriously. I will just jump back a second though and say what caused the British to lose here. It says the end for Burgoyne and his army came on the heels of a long and arduous, which means real difficult campaign that began with the stunning British victory at Ticonderoga. It says that Gentleman Johnny here wanted to link up forces with British General Howe, and then I believe St. Ledger was the other guy that he wanted to hook up with, but those guys actually did not make it to Saratoga. Only Burgoyne actually made it, but Burgoyne did not go quickly enough. It says Burgoyne's cumbersome party, basically, which included 30 carts of Burgoyne's personal possessions, several cases of champagne was stymied by the dense New York forest. So they just didn't get to this Saratoga quickly enough. They didn't get to Freeman's Farm, where the final battle kind of played out quickly enough, and they didn't get that support that they were supposed to get. It was also at Saratoga that Burgoyne's army met up with the earthworks, that real heavy mound of earth that kind of prevented them from going past. So those things together really helped to lead to the British defeat right there. The fact that Burgoyne went too slowly, he didn't get to meet up with his counterparts in the British army, and then that they met up with the earthworks, and then I guess also just the work of Horatio Gates and then Benedict Arnold, which we'll talk about later, to help win that Freeman Farm. And then as far as how did it help shift the war, again it says in Paris, the American ambassador Benjamin Franklin acted on the word of victory, begged Louis for French aid, and we saw that in that John Adams clip the other day, that Ben Franklin was there trying to commit it, to get that committed, and now they do get some French and Spanish aid for their cause. Okay, in terms of the last deal with the Battle of Saratoga, it says which patriot helped to win the day but eventually switched to the British side. Here I have a lovely picture of some Eggs Benedict, one of my favorite breakfasts. And it wasn't Eggs Benedict that helped win the day at Saratoga but eventually switched sides, but instead it was Benedict Arnold. And Benedict Arnold was somebody that helped that victory at Freeman's Farm, but he thought that Horatio Gates got all the credit. He was kind of bummed that he didn't get more credit, and so he flipped sides. So you may want to just take a look at these eggs. I don't know if they're sunny side up or sunny side down because they're drenched in that delicious hollandaise sauce. But you could maybe just think about this egg flip-flopping. You know, some people like their eggs sunny side up, some like them down. The egg can flip-flop. Well, Benedict Arnold flip-flopped. He was a patriot and then switched over to the British side. And by the way, here is that notorious flip-flopper, Benedict Arnold. He's doesn't really resemble Eggs Benedict. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with his name, but here you go. Alright, so finally for this section we have a couple things about Valley Forge. What conditions cause widespread death and desertion, and then how did Baron von Steuben help transform Washington's army. So to help explain that, we're going to take a quick look at a couple clips from the Valley Forge section of the PBS, or maybe it wasn't PBS, but the series Liberty Kids. Kind of hokey, but hopefully we'll get the idea across. So first, what conditions cause widespread death and desertion? We'll focus on that one. Okay, so you can see that the conditions aren't great. The people are walking around with poor uniforms, not much for shoes, not much warmth, little food. So what were the conditions? It was just tough. And this is again in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania now. They've moved on from New Jersey to try to regroup over the winter. And here you're going to see the soldiers kind of getting rowdy because of the poor provisions.